My name is Jerome Ferry. My cameraman is Alan Eggers. We're doing a video interview with Robert M.L. Johnson, a Cedar Rapidian for many years and former mayor of Cedar Rapids. Bob, tell us what year you were born and where you were born.
I was born January 6, 1921 in Des Moines.
What was your parents' names?
My father's name is Max L. and my mother's name was Nell L.
What was her maiden name?
Lansfield.
Lansfield. Any brothers and sisters?
2 half-sisters.
What were their names?
Phyllis and Helen.
Are they still living?
No, they're deceased.
What was your dad's occupation?
He was the office, most recently we'll go with that. He was the office manager here at Wilson and Company.
Did he get caught up in the Depression? Did it?
Oh yes, we lived in Chicago. He was with Wilson in there. He was with Dole in Des Moines, and things weren't too good there, but we went to Chicago. And they were there, and he was urging the company to transfer him at first opportunity because Chicago was not the place to raise a kid. So anyway, yes, I can remember he called up my mother and she said, "Come on, we're going to go to the bank." I was a little kid. We're going to go to the bank. And so I found out later that he said, "Go draw out all the money quick." So they did.
Yeah.
She did.
And
yes, we saw the Depression.
did you? So you went to grade school in Chicago?
Well, elementary school, they call it.
Yeah.
Low grades.
Mm-hmm. And what was growing? Do you have any memories of going to grade school?
Well, I remember in Chicago, I was, believe it or not, rather frail. Most people don't believe that. And I got beat up a lot. So my parents put me in the Catholic school, paid the fee, and I enjoyed it. I learned a great deal. When they would have confession, they would just, the nuns said, "Just you sit still and let Tommy go, and when Tommy comes back, Billy will go." And that worked out fine, and I learned a lot about Catholicism, and I respect that religion.
Was it a kind of a rough neighborhood your family lived in?
No, we lived in a wonderful, nice apartment. I used to know the address, but it's not so nice now.
You were, you had what do I want to say, when you were a small child, you loved yo-yos.
Oh yes, yes, I played up on 63rd Street. We lived at 6210. I think it was Greenwood, but I'm not sure. And yeah, the dime store, in those days, dime stores were important to the economy and to the people. And I got acquainted with the manager there twice. And I showed him what I could do with a yo-yo. And so in those days, they had people in the windows demonstrating things. So he had me in the window demonstrating the yo-yos and rock the baby and all that. Walk the cat. The kids would look, "Oh boy." But yes, I had a lot of fun with yo-yo.
So how old were you then when your folks moved to Cedar Rapids?
Well, you know, I'm never sure about that because I haven't put a pencil to it. But I went to Johnson School for 1 year, the 6th grade. So I presume I was 10. Well, I don't know.
You had thought it was around 1932, so that would put you at 11 years old.
I think that's probably right.
Then when your dad come to Cedar Rapids?
That's when he came. They had the big flood here, and he came to straighten up the office and get it reorganized.
Was he, would you call him an office manager?
Yes, he was the office manager.
You had mentioned also that with the Wilson Company, he was kind of a troubleshooter.
Yes. Yes. To wit, they sent him here during the flood, and he liked it here, and it was a good place to raise kids. And I got through high school, and first year of Co, and then they transferred him to Albert Lee, Minnesota.
Yeah. Did he have a car in Cedar Rapids?
No, that's a good story. You remember that, don't you? He didn't get married till later in life. And he bought a car. In those days, you could buy the car, they say, here's the key, and you go drive it. You have no lessons, no license, no nothing. And he bought this car, and he was driving in San Francisco. And the way he tells it, he went down a hill and wasn't sure how to brake the thing, and he ran into a candy store window. And he got out of the car, said he was sorry, walked away, and he never owned a car again. And we survived. Streetcars and walking. Buses on vacation. Trains.
You always carried the handle ever since you were young. Is M.L. Johnson? Where did that come about?
Well, even as a young kid, I could make mistakes. And we had a girl in the class named Maxine, and they called her Maxie. And then they started calling me Maxie, and I didn't like it. And in those days, things were a lot easier. I just wrote the State Department of Health, said I wanted to add Robert to my name, and signed the papers. They sent it back, the amended birth certificate. Very easy. Robert M.L. Johnson.
And then, Bob, where'd you go to high school? Franklin. What year did you graduate?
38.
Was you active in any
Well, I
extracurricular
ran
activities?
cross country, and I wasn't very good, and I wasn't very good at football, to my parents' relief. And the basketball guys were really good in those days, the Al Eddies of the world, Bill Carell, and so on. Anyway, so, well, I was in the French club, if you can believe that.
Was you active in music?
No.
How about the yearbook? You had mentioned that
No, that was at Cole.
at Cole. Okay, we're jumping ahead a little bit then.
Yeah.
Was there any youth groups that you were able to?
Oh, yes,
join
I
or
was a
attend?
DMLA. And my wife-to-be, we were married 56 years, and I can't remember when I was single. But we met in the 10th grade, and we carried it right on through for 56 years after we were married.
You had mentioned the fact that you
But
had.
I was a DMLA, and she was a Rainbow Girl. And in those days, we had simple entertainment for kids. We'd go to the YWCA on the second floor, I think it was, and they'd have dances.
You had mentioned the fact that you edited the DMLA. Was that?
Oh yeah,
was
I
it
got the
a
yes.
magazine.
I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, I always thought I wanted to be a reporter on a newspaper. I can't explain that, but that's what I always wanted to do. So I did start a DMLA paper. And sad to say, I don't even have a copy of it anymore, and I'm ashamed because it's gone.
What was DMLA
A branch of the Masonic Lodge
for the young?
for young boys up to 21.
Did you have jobs when you were in high school?
No. I
You
did. We kids didn't work in those days.
you didn't have a newspaper route?
Well, but I did get a job. Well, it wasn't a job, I guess, but I was the Gazette hired me. I didn't hire me. They said, we'll take you as a sports writer for 10 cents an inch published, and we'll assign you, Roy McHugh will assign you So I covered high school games.
This-
10 cents an inch was not very much money. One time I tried to squeeze the headline in, and Roy came over and he said, "I don't think so."
Did the young people, was it popular to smoke and drink
No,
then?
we did just like every other teenager. If we could sneak down and get a beer someplace, that was wonderful. And I didn't like beer. I never have liked beer.
How about dates? Did young people date?
Oh yeah.
High school kids date?
Yeah.
So, what year did you graduate?
38.
38. And then, did you have any idea what you want to do with your life, or did
Yeah.
your folks have
I
any
wanted to be
idea?
a newspaper.
Yeah. And how did you attempt to pursue? Did you go on to college then?
I went to Co. My wife went to Stevens for a year, and I studied journalism under Ethel Outland, a well-known professor of journalism, who gave me an F and said, "You'll never make it in the field of journalism." But I did.
Did you? Were you active with their annual
Yes, I was a sports editor of the paper, the Cosmos, and the annual, the Acorn.
the Acorn? And you did sports.
And I was the football manager. I wasn't very good at sports, can't you tell? I'm a fair to middling golfer when I could walk.
Yeah. You had mentioned the labor newspaper.
Oh yes, the Cedar Rapids Tribune. A gentleman by the name of McCormick had that. I think it was up on the second floor on 3rd Avenue where the old Armstrong building was. And I don't know how I got hooked up with that thing. It wasn't a job really. I'd write something and then he'd publish it, and I got my first byline. Wow.
I had a phrase here: name over story. Well,
Oh, first byline, the name over the story. That's what all reporters aim for with whatever they write, even when they're mature. By Robert M.L. Jones.
And when did you propose to your wife? You met her when you was a sophomore in high school.
Freshman.
A freshman.
10th grade, yes. No, sophomore. Sorry. Yeah, sophomore. She came from Roosevelt. I spotted her right away. Ah!
And you went to Cole, and she went off to a finishing school.
Stevens, Columbia, Missouri. And then she came back and went to Cole for a year. And in 1941, in the winter, I said, we'd gone together for a long, long time. And I said, I think we should get married, now or never. And she said, what do you mean, now or never? We were parked in the car in front of Garnett's Sandwich Shop on 2nd Avenue, popular hangout for kids. And I said, well, I just think we ought to do it. I'm working at the Gazette, and I can work into a full-time job. So parents approved. My father-in-law to be didn't ask me if I could support his wife, his daughter. He knew that. So then we got married July 20th, 1941.
You were telling me about going to finishing school. You were telling me about the pillow story.
Oh, yeah, you have a good memory. Yes. Several of us went down. There were several Cedar Rapids girls went to Stevens. Jean Rowe, Kay Lynch, and so on. And so we went down. I didn't have a car, but the other guy did. I think it was Jim Ralston, but I'm not sure. Anyway, we went to see him, and you make the arrangements, and you go and sign in at their dormitory, and you wait. And they announce you to my girl. And she came down, and the other girls came, and so we went out, and we got in the car, I said, Edna May, what's the pillow for? She said, in case I have to sit on your lap. And I don't remember what I said, but it had to be a priceless gem. Oh, I think I did say, well, maybe we could use it for a pillow. And that didn't fly either. But yeah, that's the kind of finishing school it was. Times have changed.
When you were going to code, did you have to work your way through college? You had part-time jobs?
My father paid for most of I worked at Wilson's, as I had previously stated. I think I worked on ran a comptometer. And then I worked at the Gazette.
You're going to have to explain that.
Comptometer?
Yeah.
There isn't one person at 10,000 knows what that means. Or maybe a minute. It was the first true adding and subtracting machine that was ever invented. Burroughs made. Had a long carriage like this, and you had keys, and you would put in your amount of whatever it might be, whether it was clothing in a store. In my case, it was product. And I would punch in the 500 pounds times 225, punch in 225, and then equals. And then you add them all up and take them to the building department. Comptometer. Keep that in mind.
Did you graduate from Co then?
No, we got married
3 years.
We didn't know there was going to be a war.
Was Uncle Sam looking for you yet?
No, I had a number, but I didn't. You never knew when your number might come up. But no.
So after you,
we didn't get well. We didn't know about the war. It hadn't come until December 7th, and so I got to go back for a minute. I got to tell you, we got married in the coach chapel, so we could always tell our kids where we were married and show them. And then the disgruntled former employee burned it down. So that was the end of that possibility. So I decided I really needed to work. And so I left the college, left the Gazette, and we went to Wichita. And I worked at Boeing Aircraft.
then did you eventually get called up, or did you enlist?
No, you have to believe this or not. Wichita wasn't as big as it is today, although it had all the aircraft people, Beech, Cessna, Boeing. And so, no, I came home one day and I said to my wife, I said, we got to go home, I got to enlist. And she said, why? I said, because I'm the only guy under 40 walking on the streets of Wichita. So we packed up and left a good job, which would probably have gotten me exempt, defense factory, but I didn't do it for that reason. It was good money. So we packed up, came home, and I enlisted.
What branch of service did you enlist in?
That's a sore spot with me. That recruiting officer, he doesn't ever want to run into me again. I enlisted in the Air Force.
With the intentions of being a pilot, maybe?
Or whatever they had for me. And then he sent me to the anti-aircraft at Camp Hewlin, Texas. But I got to like him.
Were you aware of the ROTC program that
Yes.
Cole
Yes.
was sponsoring at
I
the
was
Hunter
only in
Airport?
it a short time, and it offended me. I don't know why. Not the fact that it was the ROTC, but I guess perhaps the instructor at that time didn't quite understand we were college kids. We didn't need the kind of discipline they were trying to teach us.
Were you aware of the program at Hunter Airport at that time?
No.
ROTC or
No.
training pilots out there.
No.
So what did you, once you got into a gunner's training school, did you get shipped out or sent overseas or?
Aircraft, anti-aircraft.
Yeah. Did you get shipped out?
No. This is going to be extremely long. My wife, we got a cheap place in Palacios, Texas, and it was Camp Wallace. I said Camp Hill, it was Camp Wallace, and she came down, and we got a rickety old house in Palacios, Palacios, and so the guys, the officers, their blonde-headed girls would come pick them up in the convertible at the end of the day. And we're all standing there going back to the barracks. And I asked the sergeant, because I'd come to learn they ran the service. And I said, how do I get to do that, Sarge? He says, you want to do that? Come to my office in the morning. I said, all right. And I went in, and he had signed me up for OCS at Camp Davis, North Carolina.
Officers training school?
Officers Training School. We were 90-day wonders. That's what the regular the West Point guys call us. 90-day wonders. You learned in 90 days what it took them 4 years to learn.
Then did you eventually have to go overseas?
Oh yes, I got my commission. We went back to Texas, my assignment, and then ultimately we wound up in Camp Roberts, where I was training. That's what you did in those days, second lieutenant. And then, of course, we got called up as individuals. Oh, I'm ahead of my story. While I was doing my tour as a second lieutenant, I was reassigned to Fort Benning. I was then called a retread. I was a lieutenant. They needed second lieutenants for combat, obviously. We're very expendable, that rank. So we went to Fort Benning, and I got through the training. Then I was sent to Camp Stewart, Georgia. And from that, I was sent to Camp Roberts. And then from that, I was shipped overseas. That's a lot of my life in this thing, 4 years.
So what year did you end up getting discharged in?
1946.
So then what? Did you give it any thought while you was in the military as what you're going to do with your life when you got out?
Well, I was sure of two things. I didn't want to be in the Army, and I didn't want to work on an aircraft factory. So I said I'm going back to my true love, newspaper, if I can find a job.
What was your first job after service?
My wife and I stayed with my parents in Chicago for a while, and he'd gone back there by that time. And I think I upset my wife and my parents. You want to hear a personal story? The Army taught me three things. I'm afraid of the dark yet today, and loud noises will make me jump. And I learned how to drink. So I'd go up to this friendly corner tavern, much like Cheers, have a few drinks and talk to the guys, and come back to the apartment. I'd concern my parents and my wife. So finally I decided, as is often the case, that I had to get a job. So I got a resume together and I sent it a few places, and I got a call from Eldora, Iowa. They were looking for a general assignment reporter. It's not a very big paper. It's a weekly. And so we went to Eldora, long story short. And I wrote a column. I remember the name of it was So I'm Told, which I thought was kind of a clever name. And Kenny Watts, I believe, was the editor, and he liked me very much. And I was doing all right. And then I got a call from the Waterloo Courier. And I had wondered about getting a call from a larger newspaper, because that's what happens. They read the weekly papers and they see something that intrigues them, so they pursue it. Anyway, long story short, I did go to Waterloo on the Waterloo Courier as a general assignment reporter.
So how long did you stay with the
5 years.
5 years.
And I wrote a weekly column there too.
Mm-hmm. What was the name of the column?
I can't remember. It had to do with things around eastern Iowa, northeastern Iowa.
Did you have any children yet?
Yes, in Waterloo, my wife kept wanting children even before I went overseas, and I said, "Hey, I'm a second John. I'm expendable. I'm not going to leave you with a baby." So when we finally were established in Waterloo, we had 2 children, a son and a daughter.
So when you left the Courier then, where did you...
I left the Courier. I was there 5 years, and I got a call from WMT, Cedar Rapids. And by then I'd become kind of intrigued with radio, but the reason we left is the managing editor, Gene Thorne, was upset with me. And I didn't change what he wanted me to change, and he learned something. Because he learned you don't fire someone in front of the whole staff, because then you have no place to go. So he came up in the newsroom, and in those days it was noisy and there wasn't any computer. He stood in front of the city editor and he says, 2 weeks. And I'd been fired on the spot. And he wanted to take it back a few days later, because that was a very rash decision. I was a good, dependable reporter. I would go anytime I was called. I've been known to go in the middle of a haircut and say, just make it look decent because I'll be back. But anyway, he let me go. And it was a good thing. I got my 2 weeks vacation pay. In those days, there was no such thing as severance pay or pensions. Excuse me. And then I was hired at WMT, and they paid me 2 weeks before I could start.
What were your duties going to be at WMT?
I was going to be in the news department, on air with the news. WMT had the reputation of being the finest radio station
Eastern Iowa.
in eastern Iowa. And if you made it to WMT, you were on a par with WCCO or KRNT in Des Moines.
Did they give you any prior training to...
No, they had me go into a studio, and Grant Price was the manager, and they gave me a piece of news copy to read. They said, "Now just read this." So they went in the other room and listened to it. There's an engineer in there watching me, so you're on. And I read it, and I wondered, now what? And when it was over, the I said, okay, you read phrases, and that's very good. Some people, when you put in that position, would read, on the morning of, and I didn't. I read phrases because that's how I wrote. So, anyway, that was the training.
So was Grant the one that hired you, or?
No, Dick Sheverton hired me.
Was Bill Corton at this time, was he the head of?
Oh, yes. Finest gentleman I ever worked for.
Did you ever get to talk one-on-one with Bill?
Often. But not Bill on Bill or Bill on Bob. It was Mr. Corton on Bob.
I take
Yes.
it you had a lot of respect for him then.
Oh, absolutely. Do today. He's 100 years old.
How many times did you have to appear, like in a day's time, on the air?
Well, that varied. We had in those days real newscasts, not like they have today. And we had one at 6:15 in the morning, 15 minutes. One at 7, 15 minutes. Yeah, 15 minutes. One at 8, one at 9, 12:15, 6, 10. And of course, Grant Price did the 10. He had a kind of a lock on that, and that was fine. So I filled in a lot, and then ultimately I was the first one to do nighttime television, but that's getting ahead of
Yeah.
stuff.
Did they have commercials back then,
Yes,
like we
but
do
not
now?
like they did it to do it today. Radio news was always a lost leader. Mr. Corton knew that, but they had a reputation, always had a reputation. When Howard Anderson was here, when Jim Borman was here, who later went to WCCO. So, what'd you ask?
Lose your train of thought.
Yeah, I did. You ever do that?
Yes.
I was thinking ahead, and you shouldn't do that.
I was thinking ahead and I lost my place. Okay, so did you get into the television end of it eventually then?
Yes. Well, first of all, on the radio, we did everything. Dick Sheverton was very innovative. And I want to take the time to talk about a couple of quick things. And Edward R. Murrow, of course, was the guiding light for all newsmen, and should be today. But that's not the way it is. So, Dick got the idea. We were very close to CBS in those days, because it was a CBS station, owned by Bill Corton and others, but CBS. And Dick got the idea that we might go interview Tom Runyon, who was a writer and was published in the Saturday Evening Post and things like that. And Dick envisioned it as one that Merle could do on his program called This I Believe. And it was an excellent program. So, the long story short, his staff accepted the idea, gave us the instructions. We made the arrangements with the warden and all of that. And I went down to see him first, so he'd know I was a human being and vice versa. And I'm going to tell you something. Whenever you go to the prison, even though you know you're coming out, when they clang those metal doors together, it's a very final sound. So the first time I went to see him, I'd never been into prison before, been to Anamosa, but anyway. So the guard was escorting me, and I said, what cell block are we going in? Oh, we're not going in a cell block. We're going right over here. And here was the commissary, and next to the commissary was a little wooden building, and we went in there, and Matt Hendricks was typing. He was doing time also, bad checks. He was typing, and here was a blanket hung up, and that was, Tom came out, he pulled it back, and that was his quarters. He had a cot, slippers, bathrobe, and I thought, this is prison? But he wasn't going to go anywhere. They knew that. So we talked about how to do it, and I said, we need to keep it to 4 minutes. I think it was 4 minutes. Maybe it was more, but whatever, it was a time limit. And I said, I have an open and a close. Beyond that, it's all yours, Tom. Okay, when do you want to do it? And he said, whenever you want to do it. So we made the arrangements, and I was escorted back out. The warden agreed, knew what we were doing, knew Edward R. Murrow and what he did. And so I went back and went at the proper time, and he'd written it, timed it. And I said, okay, Tom, we need to time it one more time. And he did. I said, we're about 30, 40 seconds over. Okay, he said, I'll cut out some. So we got through with it. And Edward R. Murrow used it. And that program was the story, or the program he did on this, I believe. He would interview you and air what you say. You do it yourself, as I did with Runyon. It was recorded. And then he would start it with, this is what Jerry Smith believes. So he started it off with, this is what number 356321 believes. And then along went Runyon's voice. I didn't have anything to do with it. And it was great. We got a big kick out of it, you know. At last we were right. Then we were going to try to do it for See It Now. But the logistics of getting the camera lights and the commotion with all that was just too great.
When you were working for WMT, did you ever report on the city, what was going on in the city of Cedar Rapids? And
oh yes, I did more beat reporting than they've ever done since. There's a story everywhere: city council, board, supervisors, school board,
City Hall,
community, and City Hall. Yes, I did cover City Hall.
and at one time, then, didn't you cover the legislature in Des Moines too?
Yes, Dick got the idea and sold Mr. Corbin on it. It was rather expensive. You got to remember, these weren't the best of times, but they weren't the worst of times, but in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And he convinced him that we should cover the legislature full time. And he said, well, who would do that? He said, Bob. Is he willing to go down there for a week or two at a time? Yeah. But keep in mind, I still have a wife and 2 kids. But I love my profession. So anyway, long story short, yes, we covered the legislature. I made an arrangement with the engineer who, they had microphones. And of course they had to have an engineer that would control the volume. And I made a deal with him if he'd let me hook in this one place so I could hear him and put them on tape as the occasion demanded. He said, well, that's all right, being public anyway. So we did, yes.
Yeah. Did you ever have any interest in doing government type work?
Oh yeah, it used to bother me, it really did. And keep in mind, I'm still not an old man, but it bothered me that I would cover legislators voting no on issues and then see them turn around and do the very same thing, to wit, liquor by the drink. And I had again made a deal with Ross Leach, who managed the Bohemian Club in the Fort Des Moines, I think is a Bohemian Club. And I said, if you'll just let me come in, have a drink, and eat dinner, I won't give you any trouble. I won't do any more than that, and I will go back up to my room. He said, okay. He gave me a card. I don't know why they believed me. I had an honest face. And I'd see these legislators drinking a lot more than I was, and then turn around the next day and vote no. And I thought, that's hypocrisy. That's not right. But I couldn't do anything about it. I'm to report facts, and that's what I did. So, yes, that's when I began to think I'd like to be in government, too.
So that's when you tried to, that's when you thought about maybe getting in the city government in Cedar Rapids?
Yes, and that was the closest venue for me was city government. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. I couldn't afford to run because I had to quit my job. And fate would have it, Ed Prohaska passed away. He was the safety commissioner. And a guy I knew, he'd formerly been superintendent of a bus company. And so I applied for the job. The council knew me by now as a reporter. And I applied for the job, and I got it. And somebody asked the mayor and council, why did you appoint Bob Johnson? He's the only one that applied for it. So it pays to be a little aggressive, I guess. That was in 1957, the summer of 1957.
So you served on the council for what, 2 years? And then...
No, I served first until Mr. Prohaska's term was out. And then I ran. I told the council I wouldn't rock the boat, I wouldn't do anything. I just wanted to be on the city council and be a part of government. And I didn't rock the boat. And then I ran in the fall of 57 and was elected.
And then a couple of 3 years later, you thought about maybe running for the mayor? Or...
No, I served 2 years as safety commissioner, and we put in the one-way streets, a new building code, and in general irritated a lot of people. Although it must have been right because it's still in effect. One-way streets. My greatest ally in that was the United States Chamber of Commerce. They had written a paper on the fact that one-way streets were the quickest and easiest way to improve the flow of traffic. So they were on my side. The business people were on. They said, well, we don't know, but we'll go along. So we put in the one-way streets, as I said. And then on the next election, I was defeated, 1959.
Then what year did you decide to run for mayor?
Then I laid out and I did everything for about 2 years that everybody said was great. I sold insurance, not for me. I sold selective advertising, commonly called balloons and pencils. Straight commission, made more money than I ever saw in my life. I didn't know that there was that kind of money around. And then that was the first week I made about $300. That's pretty good in those days. The second week I didn't make anything, and one of my salesman friends said, you don't worry about it week to week, Bob. You worry about it at the end of the year. I said, okay. And I did fine. I don't like using the upright pronoun, but I don't know how else to approach what we're doing. But yes, I was successful as a salesman. And then I had the opportunity to go with Frank Magid when he was in the embryonic stage. We couldn't afford to hardly drive to Marion, much less all the places he goes now. But it was obvious to me that Frank Magid was going to be successful. It really was. And as you know or don't know, he is a millionaire. Big operation in Marion by Frank Magid Associates. And he does surveys for radio and television and other important things.
So, what year did you decide to run for mayor? 61, perhaps?
Well, after I was with Frank, and he really couldn't afford me, and we parted friends. That was okay. And then I went to work for another selective advertising company and made easy money. And then I decided I'd run for mayor against my friend Jim Meehan.
What was going to be
1961.
1961, what was going to be your platform, or what was your platform?
Drinking water. People that were around in those days will remember we had a taste and odor problem. And I don't know why Jim didn't do this, but the logical answer to me was you go to people who understand that kind of a problem. Not a chemist, a well driller. And he told me the solution. He said, funny, nobody's ever asked me. Dig shallow wells, and several of them, maybe many of them, and you'll have pure water again. The water on the river was being polluted by Waterloo. That's a known fact. I used to battle with the mayor on that.
He was talking about sand points, shallow sand points, to
Yes.
be filtered by the sand.
Sand and rock. Yeah, it worked. It must have been right because they're still doing it. There are more wells.
So was this a large turnout for
We
this?
had the largest turnout for mayor again in the history of Cedar Rapids. It sounds self-serving, but that's the kind of a program we're doing here, isn't it? And, yes, we did have the largest. I decided I was going to run. I might as well do it right. I had a headquarters and a raft of volunteers, particularly women, and we did it.
So after you got elected, then was there any things that you were any of your pet projects? Anything you started to do that hadn't been done in the past? And
Well, I have to tell you that a successful mayor will say to his council, I will be just this much stronger than you are. Not this one, this one. And a mayor proposes ideas. He thinks, and of course votes as a council member. And some mayors have gone overboard with the fact that under the code, the mayor oversees all departments. I did not see it that way. We had capable commissioners who were elected on their own, and we got along great. We agreed to disagree agreeably, and we would have some beauties, but it never went out of my office with any of us. And that's how we got things done.
didn't you start neighborhood?
Well, yes, during the
Neighborhood
campaign,
meeting.
I committed myself to that, what I could do. And I said, I will meet in every neighborhood 3 times a year at fire stations or wherever. And I did. And the first one I went to, I asked the council if they wanted to go, and they said, sure. And there were some department heads there, had their own motion. Yes, we had neighborhood meetings.
And did you have critics at your council meetings
Did I have critics?
like they do nowadays that
Oh,
are
sure.
so vocal?
Sure. We didn't have as well informed as they are today. There's one so-called critic, I don't think of her as that way, but she knows more about government than most of the councilmen, because it's her dedication. She goes to the source. I'll give you an example quick, can I?
Yeah.
She was questioning why the city had not paid its landfill fees. And the councilman said, well, we have. I'm not using any names here. We have. And she said, oh, I don't think so. And she held up a computer sheet. from the controller's office, which were all payments that were not made. What could he say?
Was bridges a problem then?
Yeah,
When you first got in?
they got to be. I didn't know they were, but the engineering staff, and again, I want to stress, if I don't do anything else, that you're only as successful as your co-workers, the council, and the departments. And we had an excellent engineering department under Dick Jensen. And somehow it came to them, and they looked into it, that the bridges were deteriorating. They were quite old at that time. And so they showed me and council. And so we said, okay, what are we going to do about it? Well, we got to replace them, repair them, not replace them, repair them. And that means closing the bridges one at a time, because they're all that way. So I had a great ally in the Chamber of Commerce. Bob Caldwell was a great help. They didn't always agree with me. I want to point that out. But so I went to him and I said, I'd like to get a meeting with whoever you think ought to be there, and we'll meet up in the Chamber of Commerce, was then still in the Memorial Building. And we'll meet on the third floor, and I'll have engineers there, and we'll explain what the bridge problem is. And he said, fine. We set up the meeting, long story short. Ned Ashton was our engineer from Iowa City, and the Kramer brothers built the bridges, rebuilt them from Des Moines. And they had arranged for 2 workmen with jackhammers to be available. I'm standing by on the First Avenue Bridge, and any member of this group could go out and say, he'd point, he'd say, there, and they'd jackhammer that out and then hand him the concrete, which was like powder. And they all were convinced to the man that it had to be done. And we did it. 3 bridges.
What was some of the other major projects that you could feel that you were responsible for under your reign? That
Well, that's a big question.
is Cedar Valley Expressway,
But
was it?
before I do that, I want to say one thing about the bridges. I said to the council, see, you can't do anything when your council's not with you. It takes 3 votes to pay the payroll. That's pretty routine. So I said, I think I'd like to, instead of you and me and that kind of thing cutting the ribbons, I think I'd like to have high school students do it. They're the ones that are going to have to pay for it. Or even maybe smaller kids. And they said, that's a good idea. And that's what we did. And it was really something to see those little girls out there and boys.
Nice gesture on your part.
Well, it made sense. They're going to pay the bill.
Yeah, that's
They're
right.
paid for now,
Okay.
but redoing them
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
or did.
Yeah.
What did I get done as mayor? Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, what's the major? Cedar Valley Expressway?
Well, the Cedar Valley Expressway, yes. Urban renewal. A lot of people don't realize that without urban renewal, we wouldn't have what we have now in downtown. There's no stores but to speak of, but there are new buildings and that kind of thing. Yes. And the Cedar Valley Road, which is now 380, most people don't know what that Cedar Valley Road was. But that had been talked about for 30, 40 years. And there were, Howard Green had done prints and all that, or sketches. So we decided, the council agreed we should do something about the road, the traffic. And it's interesting, you have the first thing they do is they have an origin and destination report. And that's where they stop you in the car on the highway and say, sir, where are you going and where have you been, in general. And we found what everybody knew anyway, I think. The desire line was and is today southwest to northeast. So that gives you a hint on where the road ought to be. So we proceeded with Howard Needles, Tamman, and Bergendoff to draw the plans. I remember before we got quite that far, we had the biggest public hearing, the largest public hearing in the history of Cedar Rapids. Twice we filled the Memorial Coliseum on the ground floor in the Coliseum. Twice. And we filled it at 10 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock at night. And we didn't expect it. We thought there'd be more in the council chamber when they had it. And I said, guys, let's go up on the platform there with the engineers. Don Gardner said to me, "No, Mayor, you go up there. We'll sit in the audience." And I, to which said, "Well, I won't say what I said."
Was there a large percentage of the population in favor of this at this time?
Yes, they knew we had to do something about the traffic. There were opponents, but I can remember, even to this day, women, two ladies that lived on Sunset Court, which was it was a circular street, no outlet, and that we were going to take their houses, and these were nice homes, Southwest. And in that program, in conjunction with the state, they had what they called the early buyout, where they would appraise the property, see if you agreed with the property price. If you didn't, you could hire your appraiser, and if the two couldn't agree, we'd get a third one to bring them together. And the good thing about that program is the state would buy your house and let you move it anywhere you want. Save them the cost of raising it. So those women were very upset with Mayor Johnson. Because even though this was a council project, I seemed to be leading the group. And I guess that's the penalty. And so, but they told me, I'd see him once in a while on downtown street. Want to tell you again, Mr. Ex-Mayor, that was the greatest thing you ever did. You were right. Yeah, the road was very important.
You were also responsible for relocating the municipal court too, weren't you?
Yeah, you're going back to the road in a minute. Are you?
Yes.
When it became 380?
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's finish that up then.
All right. So the Cedar Valley Road is what it was. And this is an upright pronoun. I was at the Williamsburg interchange, and I had a good relationship with Governor Harold Hughes. And he was there for the ribbon cutting, and I was watching. And I had a chance to visit with him for 2 or 3, 4 minutes. And I said, "Governor, we got to get a connection to this interstate. We're one of the few cities over 50,000 without a connection." He said, "Bob, we'll get you the connection." And that was good enough for me. Harold Hughes meant what he said. So I came back and told the council that, and they said, "Yeah, well, we'll see the day." And of course the rest is history. It became 380. Connected up, and then ultimately with Waterloo, and now we're to 35. Mm-hmm. Yes, you were asking?
Relocating municipal court.
Yes, the court was taking up, when the Veterans Memorial Building was built, that is the name of it, Veterans Memorial Building. The chamber had approached them, and they would pay for a place for them to be housed on First Avenue with those big pillars, and they paid for the whole thing. And the then city council agreed, and it was all right with the proposal of the bond issue. And that's how they became to be a part of the memorial building. But we were beginning to outgrow this. At that time they had a superior court, which didn't take up a lot of room and didn't take a lot of time. But as we got bigger, we needed more courtrooms, so the municipal court system came in. And to make a long story short, we needed more space. And we were running out of space. I don't believe in big government, but there are things that you do because you have to grow. So I said to the chamber, to my council, why don't we get the chamber to move? And they laughed. They said, they've been there since the building was built. I said, I know that. They said, you pull that off, go to it. And so I went to it. And we paid them what they had paid in, those many years ago, $100,000, which was a fortune back when the building was built. And so they moved. To 3rd Street, and then ultimately to First Avenue, the old Elks building. But that's how we moved the court system.
When you were serving as mayor, was the city involved in any serious floods? Was flooding a problem or floodplains problems then?
Yes, we had one pretty bad flood, as I remember. But
didn't you at this time determine floodplains or do work on?
Yes, floodplain zoning was coming in those days, and the Corps of Engineers came in with a plan for flood control along the City Hall and courthouse, or the memorial building and the courthouse. And the plan, if they had gone through with it, would have isolated those buildings. Big barriers would go up on each side, and then during the flood, of course, they would close at the bridges. And we said, we're not going to do that. And we didn't. It was a goofy plan, as they often have.
You redid the code book under your...
When I was safety commissioner.
Safety commissioner. Parking ramps, are they coming onto the scene yet? Becoming popular?
Parking ramps were built under Jim Meehan's administration.
About buses, was city
we
buses?
had city buses, city national lines, and there was a strike. You don't remember that, do you? There was a strike, and they weren't getting it settled, and our people that used mass transportation were stuck. So I made a deal with the cab drivers, cab owners, that if we issued a card to elderly people, would they give them a discounted ride? And they said, okay, and long story short. And so they did. And that lasted not very long till they came in and said, hey, Mayor, we can't go on doing this. We're picking up people that go pick up rents in 4 or 5 different houses. They can afford the fare. I said, okay, we'll let the program run out and we'll call it off. And then I got upset with the bus company and the union. And so, long story short again, this is an upright pronoun. I got the 2 head guys together and I said, I want you 2 to go in a hotel room, lock the door, and don't come out till you've got this settled. This community cannot go without bus service. If you don't settle it pretty quick, we'll run the buses. That's a terrible thing to say to a bus coming in. So they did not get it settled. So we did go into the bus business reluctantly. We is always the council and me. You can't do anything alone. And it wasn't as difficult as we thought. Ultimately, we had Ed Bagley and Stan Jazadowski, I think it was, who run the thing and maintenance and all that. But the time came to replace the buses. So we did a lot of homework on that. Ed found some used buses in Michigan. I can't remember where, Detroit maybe. And we made a deal for them, bought them, they drove them out here. And they were forever after called the big dogs. Everybody is used to the big bus now, but we used to have small buses. I mean, almost a puddle jumper compared to these big dogs. And I had a lot of opponents to that deal too.
Who was on your council when you were mayor? Can you remember?
Stuart Schenck, Finance Commissioner, Don Gardner, Parks, Frank Bosch, Safety, and Woody Stolba, and Swede Halverson.
Did you have a riverfront commission?
We did have a riverfront commission headed up by
David
Schultes. I forgot who.
Why do I have a David Ross here?
I don't know.
Anyway, looking back now, did you feel that you worked closely as a group together?
The council?
Mm-hmm. This
Oh,
group
absolutely.
of people?
Remember now, you can't do anything on the city council without 3 votes.
Mm-hmm. What was as a mayor, what was your worst issue you had to face?
The election on public housing. And I remember that very well because I was opposed to public housing as such. I was beginning to think we were giving away a lot more to the people than they could do for themselves. But we had an election on public housing for the elderly. That I was in favor of. And one time I made a talk at the Rotary Club in which I said I am unalterably opposed to public housing. And sometime later I went up to see, some short time later I went up to talk to Harry Boyd. I never got any favors, but I picked his brains as a man. And I said, well, how would that talk go at the Rotary? It's fine, Bob, but you should never say unalterably opposed. It left you nowhere to go. And that was a big lesson I learned. It was never that positive. So we did have the election, and the real estate industry defeated it. And I felt, wrongly so, I guess, that it was a referendum against me.
Skywalks, was that becoming popular around?
Just coming in. They were just coming in. And I remember that very well because prior to that time, I had talked to the chamber. I said, why don't you, and the key merchandisers, why don't you guys raise this level of your front windows and everything to the second floor and leave the first floor to all this traffic and noise confusion? Oh, Bob, you're crazy. And so the next thing I knew, they were talking skywalks. The first one we had was the Merchants Bank. And I remember it very well. This has been a long, long time ago. But I went to Jim Cocolad, and I said, do me a favor, would you? And maybe yourself. Get together at the country club with Ted Welch and have a drink and settle this between you. And he said, well, okay. And then I went to see Ted right away, and I said, would you do that? It'll make it a lot easier. At that time, Frank, his father, was opposing the skywalks as an unfair advantage to the Merchants Bank. Well, we didn't see it that way because we weren't going to give it to them. We were going to rent them the airspace. And long story short, they settled it. There wasn't any more opposition locally. And they built their skywalk. We had them appraised, the airspace. It was all a new thing in Iowa, airspace. What does that mean, they'd say. What do you mean, airspace? Well, anyway, so that was the first one, and then more came later.
You had mentioned Cocolette. Who were some of the other movers and shakers in Cedar Rapids at that time?
Well, Mr. Quorden, Sutherland Downs, Lou Feldman, Al Smilikov, Robert Armstrong.
Howard Hall.
Howard didn't. He was the shaker of bringing, mover and shaker and bringing industries here. He brought George Downing here, the Downing box, and things like that. He didn't do much with downtown.
About Arthur Collins, was he ever active in
No,
community?
Arthur Collins was a genius.
And chose his
And,
walk of life.
Well, and he is in his chosen field. And he didn't have a lot of great public relations, as you may know.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a great guy. And very loyal to his employees. Almost to the point where they couldn't work, he was still on payroll. But he was on the airport commission. That was his main contribution to the city. And he got in, this is before my time, but he got in a wrangle with the airport commissioners because he wanted to have the runways repaved. He flew a lot, obviously, had his own hangar there. And he said the runways have got to be repaved. Well, anyway, they couldn't agree. So he resigned from the airport commission. And this is a story not many people know. It's true. He went to Des Moines, to the Des Moines Register, and poured his thoughts out. And they did, at that time, they had a great circulation here. Today they have hardly any. But they had, so they did a page one story. Collins rips airport, or something like that. And anyway, they got him paved.
We had mentioned Howard Hall. Did you ever get the opportunity to visit Bruce Moore when Howard and Margaret lived there?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Were they very gracious?
Oh, Howard and Margaret were so gracious, it's unbelievable. I am just a two-bit safety commissioner. The first time, he called me up and he said, Bob, why don't you bring your key people and their wives and kids to Bruce Moore next Sunday, following Sunday. And I'm gone from 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. I go on my paper route. And I said, okay, Howard, well, what do I do? He said, you just drive up, my man knows you're coming. I said, wonderful. So, long story short, we did. Later, I found out what he meant by his paper route. He had this summer place, if you want to call it that, a house at the Palisades. And he'd pick up a bunch of gazettes and go deliver them to all of his neighbors who didn't get the paper on Sunday. That was his paper route. And we did go in the pool, and obviously everybody was my police chief, fire chief, building official, our wives, and that kind of thing, and their kids. and it was wonderful. And we got ready to leave and cleaned up out there in the cabana, and his man came out, and I call him his man because that's what Howard called him. And he came out and he said, "Mr. Hall would like you to have a drink before you leave." And we didn't know what to say, so we decided to say yes. And there were soft drinks. Could have hard if you wanted, but none of us did. And we sat in that great, huge library, and we left. That was wonderful.
Did you ever get the opportunity to visit his Tahitian room in the?
Well, another time we were out there with the consul and some other civic leaders. I can't remember what the occasion was. And he did have a Tahitian room with a corrugated tin roof with water dripping on it and palm tree like. And he had the Western bar. And I said, "Where's the John?" Howard says, "Right down the hall." And I said, "Okay." And I went down the hall, and the door was ajar, and there was a blue light on it. That made sense to me, so I just pushed the door ajar and almost had heart failure. You could hear me all over the building. I went, and I closed the door quickly, and who's standing down there laughing his tummy out? Howard Hall. When he could really get somebody, he loved it. First time through. And he had a full length, dressed, skirt pulled up, etc. I won't go into all the details, sitting on the stool with her head cocked towards the door with a surprised look. And I said to myself,
A mannequin.
A mannequin. Thank you. Yeah, a mannequin. Only a multimillionaire can spend his money that way. But another time, Don Gardner were invited, just the two of us, to Howard's house. This is a story I did tell the people at Brucemore. I think they had heard it, but he and Margaret asked Don and I if we could come out. And he always gave us enough time to get there. I said, "Sure, we'll be out." I called Don. He was down at the end of the hall. And we went out because we respected him, and he never asked for anything as such. So he sat down in this, again, the library, big couch, and Margaret was there. And did we want anything? And we allowed us how we didn't. And he said, "Well, you may wonder why we've asked you out here." And we said, "Yes." And he said, "Margaret and I want to know if we deed Brucemore to the city, can you maintain it?" And without thinking how it sounded, I said, "No, not unless you endow it very well." And he laughed and he said, "Well, we would probably do that." But then we talked more seriously about it. We didn't think it was the thing the city ought to have. Very vulnerable if he didn't own it. He had his dogs, would keep you from doing anything to Howard. And so we left that way. Margaret took us on a tour. I was very flattered about that. She and Don, both of them, he and Don. And up to her living quarters. And she had this blue room as her bedroom. And she had a blue parakeet. I'd never seen one before. And we had a parakeet, and I never wanted the kids to let it out because I didn't like it flopping on my shoulder, which it invariably did. So she opened the cage door, and out flew the parakeet past me and over on her shoulder. Blue parakeet. Never had seen one before or since. Beautiful home. They were very gracious. Stairway up to the top. You've been there, I know. Had all the pictures of people that had been I wonder if they still have those. People have been visitors at Bruce Moore. They should have. It's beautiful.
So, Bob, when did you end your term as mayor? What year?
Yeah, it's time we get to the end of the course here.
Yeah.
Well, after the public housing election for the elderly, I didn't normally take things like that to heart, but I felt this one, I had put everything I had into it. And the council had kind of let me out there alone on this one. And so I thought maybe I just wouldn't run again. 3 terms, 6 years. And I had always thought that once you've been there 6 years, if you can't get it done in 6, you won't get it done in 8.
Was there anything that you had envisioned in getting done and there wasn't time to complete it, or wished you could have completed it in a year?
No, not really. And that's the other thing. I say 3 things, and I would like this in the record. 3 things happen to a public official, whether it's in the Senate, the United States, or the legislature, or the city council. 1, you get tired mentally. You've used up all your brain power thinking up things. 2, you begin to believe your press clippings, because often if you do many things right, you get good reports. And 3, which ought to be number 1, you forget you were elected to serve the people, not the people serve you. And I've told that to many of my friends who have stayed on and on and on. Make any sense to me?
Yeah.
There are other people with brains too.
Mm-hmm. At what point in time did they try to hang you?
Well, they did that when I put the one-way streets in as commission. Burned me at the stake in Green Square and hung me from a tree.
In Evachie, of course.
Yeah, well, thank goodness, yes. We were in the Amanas having dinner with the council, and when I came back, we lived on 33rd Northeast, 409, and I saw all these police cars. I said, wow, I wonder what's happened. So I pulled in my driveway, let the family out, and put the car in the garage, and came on, the policeman was there, and I said, what's going on? He said, well, we want to talk to you, and you've been hung in effigy. I said, well, ain't that nice? I could talk big. I had police all over the place. I did send my wife and children to my in-laws out of they weren't all that old then. But obviously, there's a funny thing about that hanging in effigy. The kids just needed an outlet, that's all. And I was good cannon fodder because Lou Brewer had betrayed a confidence in the police chief's office where I was meeting, and we let him stay. I was an ex-reporter, and I knew when you should put your pencil down, you're getting background information. And because we just put the one-way streets in, the leather jacket guys on the motorcycles were killing us. Up one and down the other, up one and down the other. And I was saying we've got to kind of have a little war on them. And if you traffic guys will harass them enough, they'll make a mistake, and then we can give them a ticket and a lecture. Well, Lou was there, and I said, while we're at it, we need to crack down on double parking. That's the greatest single offense a driver can do to his fellow man or woman, is to double park. And we had a lot of it in those days. You don't have much now. And so, okay. And so then I left and we went to the Amana with the council and came back, and Lou Brewer had gone back. He used to work at Collins. And he was at the Gazette then as police reporter in City Hall. And he went back and wrote a story Commissioner declares war on teens and post office. I had said the Postal Service has a rule, and I had seen it in their driver's office. They shall obey all laws in the community in which they're driving. And I said they were double parking, and that's a violation. So he did this long story. I got hung in effigy. But something good always comes out of everything. From out of that came the first safety commissioners.
Youth committee?
Youth Commission. I couldn't think of the name. Yeah, Youth Commission. Made up of young people who wanted law and order.
Mm-hmm.
At one time, they even recommended a curfew that they approved of, and I couldn't get it through the council.
Excuse me. Did Cedar Rapids ever have a city song or a city flag?
Oh yeah, so you're getting into a lot of my history. There's not enough time in the world for this. I told you before, a mayor has to be one of ideas. It takes three to do the thing. And I thought, well, we ought to have a city song. Or on the city flag, I did them both together. So again, I called on the chamber, and they came up with the bond for the winning individual, and I went to the school system and asked them to pick the outstanding art student and the music thing, and it was open to anybody. And so, long story short, we had judges that knew art and music, and the winner was picked. Larry Barrett wrote the Cedar Rapids song. He was at Iowa City, may still be there, and thought I'd forget his name. Did the flag.
Well, anyway, did they come up with the song?
Yeah, he wrote the song. And that hurts me that I can't remember that gentleman's name. Very prominent art centers right here now, today. 1983.
Well, it'll probably
2003.
come back to you before this interview is over with.
Probably. And yes, we had the song, we had the flag made. And unfortunately, one of my successors, much later, disposed of them. I resurrected them through that and the portraits. I got the idea we should have a charcoal, some kind of a picture of every mayor who has made a contribution, and they all have. And I found this guy Art Jones who would do it for $15 a piece, and we found every mayor but Barber, the very first mayor. Never found a picture. Nobody. B.L. Wick didn't have one in his summary of Linn. So we had the charcoal sketches on the wall. Ultimately, they were in the council chamber. And later on, the council chamber was remodeled to the tune of $1 million, which I believe was probably one of the better boondoggles pulled off in this city. And the picture came down and they disappeared. And through diligence on the phone and with Dale Todd, I found them, he found them down in the archives, it's called, which I know what that is because I was in the city hall. It's just one step from the dump.
Was Mount Thrashmore, was that in existence, or the site in existence?
I was on the council when I wasn't the person on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Carl Smith was the health officer, and he had the idea for this quarry, abandoned quarry, and it would be would last 25 years.
It
Of course, it's lasted longer, but we never envisioned piling it all on there.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Didn't you run a consulting firm for a short time?
Yeah, that's one of the things I did when I decided to try everything.
Mm-hmm. real estate, didn't you?
Yeah, I sold real estate.
Dabble in real estate.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I was successful in that.
Then at one time you took a job in city council in Marion.
City manager in
Yeah.
Marion. I was invited to come be the manager. The interview I had, they said,
Remember what year that was? 70
70.
perhaps?
71, I think. And I was asked if I could serve as city manager, having been the decision maker when I was mayor. And I said, I want to be the decision maker. It takes 3 to pay the payroll. Well, the leader. I said, well, okay, yes, I can. And I could. And I got a raise in January, and they fired me in February or March, I can't remember. My wife and I were coming back from Oldline, Oldline, where I was talking on the council manager forum. And as we were driving in, I heard the news said the Marion Council has met without the city manager. I told my wife, they're gonna fire me. She said, how do you know that? I said, anytime the council meets without the manager, they're gonna fire me. And they did. And believe it or not, I was very grateful for the opportunity. And I thanked them at the council meeting, got up, shook hands with each of them, made a little short speech. And I said, my desk will be empty within the hour. And I left.
What was their reason for termination then?
Nobody ever knew. There were 2 public meetings by individuals at public places to try to, and the council wouldn't come. They want to know why you let this manager go. I don't know if they loved me so much, but they didn't like the procedure. But that's one of the things with council and city managers. They hire you and they fire you. I got a little bit ahead of them.
Did you, didn't you, then after that, shortly after that, try the Iowa legislature, try to run for the Iowa
Well,
legislature?
yeah, I looked in the mirror and said, the next guy that fires me will be me. And my wife laughed because she knew me. And so the next thing I knew, I was asked to run for the legislature on the Republican ticket. And I said, well, I don't know. And I did a little homework, and it looked like I could win, or anybody could almost win that race. At that point, I think there wasn't any primary opponent or anything like that. So,
What,
I ran.
did your wife work outside the home?
No.
She never did. What was her interest, or did she do community work, or?
Oh yes, she was a volunteer, a dedicated volunteer at St. Luke's for 30 years.
What duty or function did she volunteer for down there? That any particular?
At the hospital,
Mhm.
she at the end in the closing year, she was a patient visitor, reporting to the patient representative. You take a clipboard and your best smile, and you go talk to the patients and find out if they have some complaint they haven't mentioned to the nurse.
Mhm.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised.
What year did she pass away?
1997.
How old was she then?
Is that 5 years? 9.5.
95 years. Yeah.
How old was she?
Yeah.
77.
I want to back up, Bob. We were talking about the Iowa legislature, and you were. Did you ever actually run for the
Yes,
legislature?
I did. I ran in 1978. Served 80 and 81, and ran again in 82. And I ran for the Senate, and I shouldn't have done that.
Did you enjoy it?
Oh, I loved it. Yes. I didn't like being away from my wife, but yes, it it was an education, having covered it once as a reporter, and I tried to stand by my principles. Yes, it was very educational.
Then you were beat out by.
When I ran for the state senate, Wally Horn defeated.
Okay.
And he's still there. That'll tell you how long he's been in office.
When you served in Washington, did you stay there, or did you commute back and forth?
Washington D.C.
No, in
Des Moines.
yeah.
No, I stayed all week and came home on weekends. But I did run for Congress way back, 1966.
I think we would pass that up, and you talk.
Just as well, I got defeated. Great experience.
By who?
John Culver.
John Culver.
Never run against a guy the first time he's running for re-election. But John's a friend of mine anyway.
Well, Bob, let's talk a little bit about your family. You said you had 2 children. What was their names? You're on the. Go ahead.
Well, in 1941 on July 20th, as I said, Edna May and I got married in the Coat Chapel, the old Coat Chapel. And later on, many years, we'd been married 7 years before we had any children. Our son, Rex, was born in 1947.
What's he doing today, Rex?
Rex works in Marion for a company called Infinity. And our daughter was born in 1950, and she's a teacher at Decorah, and one time taught Luther students for a year.
And this is your wife, and
Oh yes, that's Edna May, and it's one of my favorite pictures for all its not color and all that.
she's a very attractive lady.
Thank you.
This picture here, Bob, is the entire group.
This is the wedding picture of my granddaughter, Wendy, my daughter's daughter, and my son, and obviously my daughter, and my grandchildren, and my 2 little great-grandchildren.
Who is this, Bob?
This is my grandson, Michael Mullers, who will graduate from UNI in the summer of 2003. And that's the girl he's going to marry, Christy.
These are great-grandchildren? Bob?
Yes, this is my great-grandchildren, Noah, and the granddaughter,
What is
Nicolette.
Nicolette?
You want to hear him talk?
Yeah. Sure. Move your finger in
Oh,
there.
look, great Papa Bob, this is your great-granddaughter speaking. I am sending you hugs and kisses. I love and miss you. Love, Nicolette.
Tilt it a little bit. Push the button. Push the button.
Sorry.
Hello, great Papa Bob. How are you? I love and miss you. Go, Joy, Bus. Bye. Love you, Noah.
Bob, if you had your life to live over again, is there any things you wished you could have accomplished or wished you would have tried?
Well, oddly enough, no. I'm very satisfied with my life, even the defeats I had, because I think defeat makes a man a better man. I didn't think so at the time, but I do now. No, I would do it all over the same.
Bob, unless you have any other memories to share with us, the Linn County Historical Society, the Cedar Rapids History Center would like to thank you very much for sharing your memories with us.
Thank you very much.